All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to this pop-up episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Today we're going to be going through, again, our setup script that we're now calling GOATs. I don't know if you want to call it that, but I'm calling it GOATs.
We're going to have to clean up the names for a lot of this, but it'll just be naming changes.
To change it to GOATs?
Yeah, and I mean, there's some other, I want to change the names of some of the commands too, but yeah, we got to change it to something better.
Yeah, I like GOATs. GOATs new. GOATs add user. Anyways, I guess we can start sharing your screen and start going through it.
Yep. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to jump it back and forth between some of these screens here. So now you should see the README.
Yes.
Which basically we're going to start after the prerequisites and the installation. So we have some prereqs here, installation here. Here's what we're actually going to be running. I'm going to walk through while it's running kind of what's like going forward, what we're going to do. So there's a number of options for the command, whether it's GOATs or Gunnerfy or whatever we're calling it. But the ones that are required are the project name, a unique email address, and an organization name. So the project name is pretty straightforward. And the project name is pretty straightforward. The email address just has to be a unique email address that you have access to. It can be any email address as long as it's not associated with an AWS account already. And then the organization name is kind of like the client. So if we take an example here, which we're going to do, our client is BetX, BetX LLC. So that's our client, and the actual project is called PropSwap. So using those, I'm going to run the Gunnerfy command. So let me just.
And I don't know if you mentioned, but the email has to be unique across all of AWS, right? As far as what accounts are set up.
Yeah, I was just saying the email address, there's two requirements. You have to have access to the email address. And well, actually you don't have to have access to the email address. There's no verification, but if you ever want to remove the account, then you have to verify the address.
Right.
So it's
recommended.
recommended.
Do you want me to add that to your user ID, by the way, while we go through this? Do you want me to add that email to your user? Or you get you're the catch-all. Never mind.
Yep, exactly. So I'm just going to switch over to the terminal window now. And let me clear that out. So here I am, and I'm just going to basically run Gunnerfy, and then the project name, which we said is PropSwap. And then email will be propswapcody@gunnertech.com. And then the organization is going to be BetX LLC. Now, this is by convention that we do this, because what this command is actually going to do is going to create a new project since we don't have this project existing, and it's going to add a new environment, which is going to be the Kody environment, which is me, because it's going to be an environment that runs on my local machine.
And I guess maybe to touch on that, like every developer who works on one of these projects is going to have their own environment, because we don't want to be clearing out databases for other users when we clear ours out, or screw up other users when we're sort of deving on our own branch.
Right. Yeah. So each developer will have their own back-end architecture, so they don't have to worry about stepping on anyone else's toes. And the back-end architecture runs on AWS directly. So the problem would be if we only had one development environment, then I could be tinkering with the back-end architecture, which would screw up Derry, who is working on the same project. So that's why we have an environment per developer. So,
and I guess we'll get into what the background architecture is as we sort of run through.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just kick this off, and then this is going to run through a ton of stuff, and we don't have to sit here and watch it do all this. I'm going to kick it back over to sharing my browser window here.
I guess we could talk about what is being set up.
Yep. So
as the process is running.
So basically, it's going to go through. It's going to do a number of things. It's going to one of the requirements here, by the way, we say you have to have a master AWS account and have the AWS CLI set up. So in our case, our root account is called Gunner Technology, and every one who runs this script has to have an IAM user on the root account. For me, that's Cody. For Derry, that's Derry. And usually it's just the first name. In the case of a collision, it's just like first name and then last name kind of thing. So that's the requirement number 3 here. So what this is doing, what this script is actually doing is it's creating a new AWS account, and it's adding it to what's called AWS organizations. And it creates a new organizational unit, which is that O option. In this case, it's BetX LLC. It creates a new organizational unit and then places this new account underneath that organizational unit. So if you think about it, you have the in the way the AWS organizations work is the root is an actual account. So that's Gunner Technology. Then you have an organizational unit, which actually is not an account. It's just like a marker for structure called BetX. And let me actually, I'm going to interrupt myself here because I have to.
Or BetX LLC.
BetX LLC, yeah, exactly. Let me go back to the terminal window because I forgot we're going to add some stuff. So it's asking us now what kind of API we want to set up.
Do you want to run through what it did before this step?
Yeah, well, it basically did what I was talking about. It created a new account, created a new organizational unit, placed the new account underneath the organizational unit, and now we're walking through the process of setting up.
I guess handle all the Git configuration to make sure that the deploy will actually work.
Oh, yeah,
the push will actually work.
Yeah, exactly. So it configures your Git profile so you can access the repository because, again, you need a unique AWS profile to access the Git repository that's created as well. So you have the account creation, the AWS organization, you have the Git setup, and then we're now setting up Amplify. And unfortunately, Amplify makes you, which is an AWS product, it makes you walk through this process. We can't script this. So basically,
if you work on enough projects, so you'll get so good at running through these commands.
Yeah. So some of these are standard, right? Like there is some discretion involved here, but like for example, when you're running the script, you're always going to want to pick GraphQL. The name of the API, the default is fine. Again, you're almost always going to want to choose Cognito user pool. You're never going to want to have a production app that's based off the API key. So you're almost always want to choose Amazon Cognito user pool. I'm going to go through manual configuration for setting up the security configuration, just so you can see what's in there. So basically, I do not know what is this number 2 option. I know that we always want number 3 because we're always using storage and analytics and stuff like that. So always go with the first option. Again, the default names are fine. Allow unauthenticated logins. So here's the example, right? Imagine you have an app where, like, take Twitter, for example. Twitter is a good example. If you don't allow unauthenticated access, then you would have to be logged in to actually see tweets. We want people to be able to see tweets without them being logged in. So that's why we're going to say yes for this case. If you have an app where you don't want them accessing any data unless they're signed in, you would say no, don't allow unauthenticated logins. Does that make sense, the way I explained that?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, you can imagine, like, I mean, like some of the clients we work with deal with medical records, where obviously the public shouldn't have access to medical records.
Exactly.
And only users of the application should. So in that case, if it were built using Amplify, we'd have unauthenticated logins set to no for that.
In this case, we want people to be able to see the tickets that have been posted for the project without having to sign in. So we're going to say yes, allow that. But that's one where you'd have to choose based on your project needs. Do you want to enable third-party authentication providers in your identity pool? This would be if you wanted to allow like people to log in with like their Google account, their Facebook account, all that stuff. If you say yes, you have to be prepared with the app ID and all that other stuff from that. We don't have that requirement, and we don't have that information, so we're going to go no. But again,
do you know how difficult it is to set up if you select no and then want to add it later?
It's very easy.
Okay.
It's very easy. You just basically run amplify config auth, and it'll walk you through this whole process again. Please provide a username. Again, the names don't matter. Okay, so here's something that you may want to configure? How do you want people to sign in to your Cognito user pool? So think of this as your app. Do you want people to log in with their username? Do you want to log in with their email address, phone number, or email or it should say email or phone number, because that's what that means really, is email or phone number. So in this case, we're going to do email and phone number. But again, if you had an app that was like heavily username based, maybe you want them to enter their username.
I wonder why username and email is an option.
What's that?
Username or email? Why that's not an option? Or like any of the three?
Yeah, because like with like, I think Twitter, you can log in with username or email. I don't know. You could customize this. This is just the automated setup. You could implement something programmatically that checks if someone entered a username and then grab the email address and use that. But here's an example. Like if you're developing an app where like an account can have multiple email addresses, you'd want to use username instead of email address. The easiest one to use is email and phone number. So we're just going to go with that, email and phone number. Okay, so multi-factor. So you can either go off, on, or optional. Now, it's important to note that if you go on, it's required for all logins. You can't change it later without destroying the whole user pool. So you want to be very careful that that's like, you talk about for medical applications, you want to turn that on, required for all logins. This means whenever you log in, it's going to ask you for a code every single time. So I usually go with optional, just in case there's a requirement later on down the road in the project where we want to offer this to users. Optional allows them to say whether or not they want to use MFA when they're logging in. This is not, by the way, this does not affect registration. Registration requires you to confirm. This is just for actually logging in after you've registered.
And you can also sort of configure it on the app side, right? If you select optional, it makes it easier to sort of handle on the app side.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. So MFA types. So time-based, the TOTP is more secure, but it's also more difficult for the users to use. SMS is basically, when you get that code, you get a text message saying, here's your code if you forgot your password, kind of thing. SMS is subject to what's called social engineering or social hacking, where you could basically call Verizon and be like, hey, I screwed up. I need you to reset my SIM. And then you could take over someone else's SIM and be like, then go reset your password. And when the app texts you your password or your code reset, it goes to the compromised SIM. So you could hijack someone's reset code that way. But again, that's an issue for like ultra secure apps.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So if you need to worry about that kind of stuff,
right, exactly. These are just defaults about what you want, what the reset message looks like. So we're just go with the default. So email-based users registration forgot password. So we're doing email login by email anyway, so it shouldn't even ask this question. But the option is, the second one is kind of weird, where every single time you register, you don't put in a password, you put in an email address, and it sends you a code to log in. You don't have a password. So that's what disabled is.
Weird.
Yeah. Disabled is like you never ever have a password. When you go to log in, you just say Cody@gunnertech.com, and they're like, cool, we just sent you a code. What is it? And that's how you log in.
Interesting.
Yeah, but we're just going with password. Again, default for the text here. Do you want to override the default password policy for this user pool? We're going to say no, but this is like things like how long it has to be, which I think is 7, and then it requires an uppercase, lowercase,
number and special character.
And a special character. So their default's pretty good, so we're just going to leave the default. Okay, so
although I will say, like, most people aren't used to having to put in a special character, so it's usually a good idea to somehow display that on the password field.
Right. So this is, what attributes do you want to require for the person to sign up? We're just going to leave this as email. That's all we're going to require in order to sign up. But you can go through all these other options if you want.
Not even name for this app, huh?
What's that?
Not even named for this one.
Yeah, you don't need that. And again, you can change that requirement, and you can make it an app requirement at the app level. This is just
Right.
at the actual Cognito pool level. Apps refresh token. This means basically if they don't sign out, they'll be signed out after 30 days automatically, just to force a refresh of the token. 30 days is fine. You can make it 90. You can make it 180. You can make whatever you want. Do you want to specify the user attributes this app can read and write? So I'm gonna say yes, just so we can go through it. So specify that. So this is the attributes that Cognito makes available to your app. And so we're not using any of this stuff. For example, we can add email verified in here just to see if their email has been verified. Phone number, we'll add that so we can just get that back to see if it's been verified. All the other stuff we have no use for. And so then it's going to ask what attributes we'd like to be able to make the app write. And we have no interest in updating any of this stuff. So we're just going to leave that as it is. OAuth, this is if you're actually like enabling other apps to kind of integrate with your app, and you want to provide an OAuth flow to authenticate those apps, and we're going to say no.
So that would be different than the third-party authentication providers above, in that you're not. The first one is logging in from Facebook or Twitter or Google or something like that.
Right.
The OAuth flow one is allowing people to log into other services using your app. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have an annotated GraphQL schema? So you can say yes and actually plug in your schema right off the bat. We don't have one, so we're going to say no. Do you want a guided schema creation? I'm going to say yes, just so you can see the options, although we don't really need one. And then it gives you a number of options just to start with. I'm just going to start with the easiest one, because we're not going to actually use it at all. And then it says, do you want to edit it? I'm going to say no, but you can actually open it and edit it right away. I'm just going to say no for that. I hit the default. Sorry. So it opened it in my editor, but now I'm going to just hit enter to continue. So that's the amplify process. So basically now now we're going to set up pinpoint.
Yeah, there's a couple more. I think there's 4 more.
Yeah, pinpoint is for analytics purposes, so you can see what your users do. It's very similar to like Google Analytics. Apps need authorization to send analytics events. Do you want to allow guests and authenticated users to unauthenticated users to send analytics events? Yes, we do. So like we want to know like if a guest attempted to sign in and couldn't sign in, kind of thing. So we're going to use the default there. Okay, so now
it'd also just be for like general usage of the site, right? Somebody's logged out and what pages are they hitting?
Please select. So now we're adding what's called Amplify storage. And so again, for our purposes, we always want to do content. We never want to set up a NoSQL database this way. So we're going to use content. A friendly name, we can go with the default. Names don't matter. Again, the bucket name does not matter. So we're just going to use the default. Okay, so who should have access to the storage? We're going to say, again, this is very similar to the app. So we're going to go auth and guest users. And we want, if you're signed in, we want you to be able to update, read, and delete content. So we're going to leave that as, we're going to select all of them. And then for people who aren't signed in, we just want them to be able to read the content. So this is going to take a few minutes, because this is actually deploying our Amplify setup via CloudFormation templates to AWS. It's actually going to step through it. It's going to take probably about 3 minutes or so. So I'm going to click over back to the README and just sort of talk about some other stuff with the goats or Gunnerfy or whatever we want to call it. Let me see, where did it go?
Goats, 100% goats.
So basically, I want to talk about what's going to happen next. So after this runs, we have a number of options. We're going to want to definitely create a staging environment. So you noticed in our Gunnerfy example, we didn't pass a stage. So it defaults to, it creates a default stage that defaults to your IAM username, which I said was Cody. After this, we're going to want to create a staging environment. Basically, the staging environment is where things get tested. The client has access to seeing it. They can test it. This is also the stage where all of the developers on the project, so this is where the code comes together. So again, using the example of me or Derry and I on a project, Derry and me on a project, then basically we need to have a stage where we merge all our code and infrastructure changes together. That's our staging environment. Now, staging is just what we call it. You could set up a test environment if you wanted to, if that's what you wanted, where you wanted your code changes to come together. So this example uses fine-grained access control. So basically what this means is taking this example, we're creating a Cody environment for prop swap, and then we're going to create a staging environment for prop swap. Now, after that, Derry could run on his laptop right now. Gunnerfy new. He could run the same command I did, and it would create an environment for prop swap on his local machine. But because I set up the staging environment, he would not have access to it because he's not placed in what's called the AWS group that has access to the staging environment. That's another command where we have to actually give him access to the staging environment. And
Although
again,
realistically, like in the scenario where I'm, say, a junior dev who shouldn't have direct push access to staging, that's exactly how it should be set up.
yeah,
Where I would have to submit pull requests and stuff for my code to actually be merged into the staging branch.
Right. Exactly. Actually, so the staging environment. So yeah, you're exactly right, and I'll get to that in a second.
Yep.
The second way.
Sorry, go ahead.
With his lax access control, this allows you to be a lot more. It allows you to skip adding people, having to add people that they can add themselves directly. So this G option, this is where we actually specify the group name instead of auto-generating one. So we could have created a group called prop swap admins, right? And so then so I could have run Gunnerfy new without a stage and then passed a group prop swap admins. And then again, I could set up a staging environment and pass it the same group prop swap admins. And then Derry could actually just run Gunnerfy new prop swap and pass the group name prop swap admins. And he wouldn't have to be added to the group because you pass the group name, it automatically adds him to the group name. So that's more if you want to have lax access control and you trust all your developers and everything like that, you can pass the G option and have them pass the same G option as well.
What if I run it with well, I'll ask you that offline.
Okay, so the next one here is okay. So Sentry is something you can add after the fact, and that's basically an error reporting tool. So this is cool because if you have any errors in production or staging, it emails the team and says, "Here's what went wrong with the stack trace." So it's good to have that set up, but it's a totally different totally different setup or a totally different command. The important thing to remember is when you create your Sentry project, use the project name that you use to create this project. It has to match in order to work. So this one's called prop swap. It needs to be prop swap when you create the Sentry project. One of the things you're going to see at the end of this process is going to ask us if we want to set up an RDS database. We're not going to need one for this project, so we're going to say no. But our setup script has the ability to integrate with a SQL database, an Aurora NoSQL database, or an Aurora database, a SQL database. And this will actually allow you to run migrations very similar to Rails if you're familiar with that. And then this amplify API command will actually generate your GraphQL data source for accessing it.
That's so
the
cool.
next,
Goats is the best.
What's that?
Goats is awesome. That's one of the best parts of this entire process. The
Say
RDS
one more
schema
time.
migrations. The RDS migrations are like one of the cool parts.
Oh yeah. And yeah, you literally just write Gunnerfy generate migration, and then the name of the migration, like create pets table, and then the statement you pass is literally the SQL statement that you want to run when the migration runs.
You know, Frank mentioned on the live stream today that SQL is sort of becoming the query language de rigueur of like big data.
Yep.
Uh, That's fascinating to me because it seemed like maybe like as recently as like 2 or 3 years ago, it was NoSQL all the way.
Yeah, well, like that's the weird thing is like NoSQL has been like NoSQL is becoming, and I'm going to get in trouble by saying this. The hype behind NoSQL is now related more to primary data storage for like your application. So like when your application writes directly to, in our case, it's RD or DynamoDB, which is a NoSQL data store.
Yeah.
And so it's key based, and that's like the source. But for retrieval purposes, you want to have it propagate to like a SQL type, like a SQL type store, like we were talking about Elasticsearch and how that's going to support SQL statements.
Yep.
Or again, like the data, they see RDS as the data lake, like just a sea of data. And then to make reason out of that data for analytic purposes, you would stream it through like Kinesis or something like that, or Redshift, which are SQL based querying language. So it's like NoSQL is the hype for putting data, and SQL is the big hype for querying data, which makes sense because you don't query data with a NoSQL database. You don't. You look it up. You don't query it. So it makes sense.
So it's like NoSQL for writes and reads, and SQL for queries. Anything beyond that, basically.
Yeah, it's yep. NoSQL for key-based retrieval.
Yeah. Yeah. Simple
And
reads, I guess, is what I
storage,
should have said.
and SQL for queries. That's right.
Yeah.
So right now, if we kick it back over, I want to kick it back over to the script, which is still running. The what it's doing right now is, are you seeing? Yeah. So right now,
I'm seeing your face. I'm not seeing the screen yet.
oh, okay.
There you go.
So right now, it ran through all of the Amplify stuff, and now it's using the serverless framework to create additional options and deployments. And right now, for example, you can see it's stuck with this one right here. This is the longest part of this. This is creating a CloudFront distribution. So a CloudFront distribution is basically a CDN. And the reason we want to set up a CDN is because our app will support uploads. And rather than having a user request the uploaded content directly from S3, which is fast but not extraordinarily fast, we're going to have them get the files from the CDN, which is lightning fast. But the problem is because the CDNs are global, they have to set up the nodes across the known universe, and so that's why it takes like 20 minutes for that to set up. All right, let me kick back over to the README here. So the next part of this, after we set up the staging environment, would be adding a team member, because we're going to use fine-grained access control. So basically, the creator of the stage you want to share is going to run this command, which is basically just like Gunnerfy users add, and then you pass the username, which is the IAM username on the root account. In our scenario, that'll be Dairy, and the stage you want to give them access to. In our case, this would be staging. Once that command runs, Gunnerfy will spit out a command to send to the developer, and they would run that, and they would then have access to that stage. Maybe that's sufficient, but most likely they're going to want to also add their own personal environment. So they would run this, once they add the project, they would then add they would run the same command that we're doing right now. Gunnerfy includes some things for development as well. So when you're working locally, you're going to run Gunnerfy develop. Gunnerfy develop is basically a wrapper around the watch command that makes sure that whenever, this sets up, I should step back. Gunnerfy new sets up a back-end environment and 2 front-end environments. One front-end environment is a React client. The other front-end environment is a React native client. So when you are making API changes to your GraphQL schema and deploying them, because you don't have a local environment, you have your own dev environment on AWS. So when you deploy your backend changes, what Gunnerfy actually does is rebuilds your GraphQL schema for you, which is really cool. But it has to send the new schema to the client, to both clients. So Gunnerfy develop watches for backend changes and then pushes those changes to the clients running on your local machine. So basically, that's how you start the backend, Gunnerfy develop. To start the React client, you just change directories into the React client and then run stage equals the stage you want to start, and then npm run start. So, similarly with the React native client, you run stage equals stage you want to run, npm run, and the simulator you want it to run on, whether it's iOS or Android. At the start of an iteration, again, we're an agile shop here, so this is kind of how we start our iterations. So basically, you're going to git checkout and you're going to check out the base stage, which in our case is staging, and then you're going to run git pull, so you have the latest staging changes on your local machine, and then you're going to check out your local environment, which in my case would be Kodi. Git checkout Kodi, and then git merge staging. What this does is, don't forget, we all submitted our pull requests, and then the project manager or the lead developer, they're the ones who merged it on staging. So now we got to get everyone else's changes for this iteration. That's how we do this. Then finally, what you want to do is, and really you shouldn't have to do this, but just to make sure, you want to do an amplify. This is telling Amplify which environment you're on. Amplify, env checkout, and then your local branch. So Kodi in my case. Again, you really shouldn't. You really should have no reason to be on staging anyway, but just to make sure. So then that's the start of the iteration. This is how we work on issues. So everything is in a Redmine ticket tracker, or you don't have to use Redmine. You can use GitHub, Jira, whatever. They all offer issue numbers. So then as a local developer, I would create a new branch, and the name of that branch is the issue number. I would work on it, blah, 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 blah. If I make back-end changes, again, remember, we don't have a back-end on our local machine. So if I make back-end changes, I have to run Gunnerfy deploy back-end. This will push all of my, this will push a new infrastructure change to the back-end. So then again, once I'm done working, I commit the changes again on that topic branch. And the commit message should just be closes and then the issue number, so we can go back and look up what issue it was. Then you're going to check out your stage again. So then git checkout Kodi, and then I'm going to merge that branch into my repository. Yeah. And then push those changes. Really, the git push is optional. You don't have to push the changes up. It's just good to have it in case your machine dies before the end of the iteration, so you have the changes remotely, so they're secure. And then finally, just get rid of the topic branch. That deletes the branch. So then you're going to again repeat this on every single issue throughout the iteration. Bless you.
Did that come through? How'd that come through?
I think you're on. Maybe you're on your.
Oh, that's so dumb. I'm on my internal mic instead of
your internal mic. Yeah. So then at the end of the iteration, each developer will run this command, which is Gunnerfy git submit, and then the name of the iteration, which is just the date in this format. Bless you.
How did that come through?
And then finally, T is the target stage. So in our case, it would be staging. This is where you want your pull request to be submitted. So you would do a target stage of staging. So now as a developer, you're done. with the iteration. Now again, the project manager, the lead developer has to go through the pull requests and either accept or reject them. And this is how they do it. Basically, oh, sorry, this get submit will give you as the developer a request ID. You don't necessarily need to know that, because the lead developer will be able to look up the requests. But when they approve the pull request, they don't have to use the GUI. They can just run Gunnerfy get approve and then pass the request ID and then the stage that they're allowing it for. So this would be get approve, iteration, or request ID 2 branch staging. And so then the lead developer is going to do that for every single pull request. And then finally, after it's all done, they're going to run Gunnerfy get tag, which is going to create a tag for that iteration.
You might have mentioned it while I was sneezing. But where's is he getting the request ID from code commit?
Yeah. So exactly, code commit will have the request IDs. The generally speaking, what I imagine the workflow is usually as, because the developer could finish their iteration at any time. So like I said, Gunnerfy get submit will spit out a request ID, and then you can email the the lead developer, say, I'm done with my tickets, here's my request ID.
So just track them during the iteration and then send them along. Might
Yeah,
be a good way to do it.
and that would be, yeah, exactly. So like, and again, like let's say our iterations they start at Wednesday and they end Tuesday just before midnight.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say on Thursday, let's say you're the lead, and I finished all my tickets on Thursday. I run Gunnerfy get submit, and it says, here's your request ID. I ping you on chat or email or Slack or whatever. I say, I'm done with my tickets. Here's my pull request ID. You don't have to wait for the end of the iteration to check out my code. You can like review it. Oh, that looks good. I approve that request ID. And then maybe Anthony finishes all his on Friday.
Right.
Anthony says, here's my request ID. So yeah, it kind of like depends on how you want to handle that, but the request ID is what's key. And just as I was finishing that up, the deploy finished. So let me switch back over to that. So here's what I was talking about. It says, would you like to set up an RDS cluster? We're going to say no, but if you say yes, it'll walk you through setting up an RDS SQL cluster. So we're going to say no. And so basically it should finish here in 1 second. We set up the React Native client. It set up the React client. It set up the serverless backend. And now we're all finished.
Is there a reason you didn't set up the RDS for this project?
Because we don't need it. There's no...
That would make sense. That's a good reason.
Yeah, there's no SQL. Need for the project. So I think I may have added a command that I haven't documented for after the fact, adding a SQL database. If not, it's on the project list. So that's it. Now I have an environment set up. I can start developing as is. But like I said, we definitely want to set up a staging environment. So again, can you still see my screen?
Yep.
So I'm just going to clear all this out. And and let me show you this. So if I show...
Just for folks running through this script, what's a good use case for when you would want to set up RDS?
So
like if you're going to be doing like data analytics.
Yeah. Or if you have like highly relational data where RDS is not, or excuse me, gosh, I keep getting confused, where Dynamo is not going to be a good use case for like data storage, then yeah, you'd want to set up a SQL database right off the bat. Or heck, if your team is more comfortable using SQL than DynamoDB, you could set up a SQL database.
What are the drawbacks using, I guess maybe this is a bit off topic, but
no, it's great.
What are the drawbacks using RDS versus Dynamo, in terms of like this setup, this architecture?
Mainly the main drawback to using RDS instead of DynamoDB is DynamoDB is more tightly integrated into the AppSync and Amplify stack.
Right.
Like that's the main reason. Because like they have like Dynamo streams, which are like triggers, like database triggers. They have basically you do your setup declaratively, like you literally write your schema in GraphQL, and then Amplify creates anything necessary on the Dynamo end, which with RDS you do it the other way around. You set your migrations, you create your tables, and then you tell Amplify to create your GraphQL schema based off of that. So it's just mainly the biggest downside is it's not a first class citizen of the Amplify
Right.
AppSync stack yet. Anyway,
Is there a cost difference, Dynamo versus RDS with this setup?
that's a great question. So they're both on demand, right? The RDS cluster that it sets up is what's called a serverless cluster. So you only get charged for what you use. Same thing with DynamoDB. Now, I don't know offhand which is cheaper based on like it could be that Dynamo is 0.0001 cents per request and RDS is 0.0002 cents per request.
Right.
I don't know exactly what is cheaper in that regard. And then it also kind of enters in where you can do join queries on a SQL database, which would join into one request as opposed to where you actually have to munge the data on Dynamo, which would be 2 or more requests kind of thing.
So I guess something to think about for folks deciding whether to do RDS versus Dynamo.
But we see, can you still see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so prop swap, it created the directory, and that's what it looks like. You have, like I said, you have the Amplify directory, you have the serverless directory, you have the React Native directory, and you have the React client directory.
I'm just gonna split for a second. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to run the same command. Let me just clear this out. Run the same exact command. We're going to do 2 different things. Remember, I said the email address for each environment has to be unique. So we're going to change this to staging. And then we're going to add, instead of letting Gunnerfy select the default stage, we're going to pass the stage we want to create. So we're just going to run this and kick that off. And you'll see some, we're working on cleaning this up. You'll see some like fatal errors. They're not really fatal. You can just safely ignore those. But this is going to run through and create the staging environment. And it's exactly the same. So I'm going to go back over to the, README so I can explain some more stuff here. Okay, so we talked about the workflow, now deploying. And we've talked about deploying, right? So because you have to deploy your local changes in order to see them on your local environment. So that we've talked about deploying the back end. But again, after all of the pull requests have been approved, you want to move it to the staging environment and then later probably the production environment. So in that case, in order to deploy the backend, you just do Gunnerfy deploy backend, and again you can pass it the stage option of -s staging. Gunnerfy deploy mobile will deploy the React Native code to Expo, and then finally Gunnerfy deploy Gunnerfy.
This is why we have to call it goats. I'm telling you.
Yeah, seriously. Gunnerfy deploy web will
to the fleb
will deploy the React client to Amplify with a full SSL cert and everything like that. So that's how you deploy at the end of the iteration. You would like run Gunnerfy deploy web-s, Gunnerfy deploy mobile-s, Gunnerfy deploy backend.s as well.
You did it.
I did it.
For folks who might be curious, how does Route 53 fit into this in terms of setting up those records? There's nothing integrated into the process here, right?
Correct. Now, you're 100% correct. There is nothing is, this script does nothing for Route 53 as is. However, and it's an undocumented feature, the serverless framework, I have a variable called domain name, and by default it's blank. However, if you put a domain name in there, then serverless will actually create the CloudFront or Route 53 distribution and hosted zone. So by default, it does nothing, and it creates these URLs like this. Like, can you see
Yep.
this?
Yep.
This is how it creates default URLs like this.
Yeah.
And then if you want to add your domain later, then you can add that domain name to serverless. And again, automatically it will associate everything with that domain.
Yep.
So the last thing kind of to know here from the README, oh, two things. We put this section here where, like, if you want to really get good with all this stuff, read through these docs. Like, just actually pour through them. The only ones that aren't really necessary that I put in here anyway are these Ramda and
Yeah, I was gonna say Ramda.
RxJS docs. But
Yeah.
like, if you were like, I want to go work for Gunner Technology, where do I start? I would point you right here. Like, if you can go through all this stuff and really are familiar with that, then you would have no problem working at Gunner Technology. Here's a weird one, right? Okay, so I want to point out a gotcha, two gotchas. One with DynamoDB, and that's here. And I can't believe that Amplify has not fixed this problem yet. You can only deploy. DynamoDB has this concept called local secondary indexes (LSIs) and global secondary instances (GSIs). You'll see them mentioned all the time.
In
Not so much.
indexes.
What's that?
Global secondary indexes. You said
Yep.
instances.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So not so much LSIs, but GSIs are talked about all the time. And so GSIs are basically like a foreign key. That's basically how it works if you're thinking about SQL. And so in order to actually query in DynamoDB, you have to create GSIs. Like, if you want to get all comments by blog post, you have to create by blog post ID. You have to create a GSI for post ID and associate it with every comment, right? So, but the thing is, DynamoDB will only let you create one GSI per table per time. So, like, let's say you try to add, like, you want to be able to query comments by user and comments by post ID. So you add, if you add that both to your GraphQL schema and hit deploy, it'll bomb.
Yeah.
And the reason is because only create one at each time. So keep that in mind, because it is kind of nasty if you do it and then you have to undo it. So we wrote this little script where basically you can run this. You can run this script to see if there's any indexes being created. You can run this little script, and if they're all active, you're all good. You can deploy. But again, try to deploy one index at a time. Otherwise, you're going to run into some problems.
And I can't remember if we've actually seen the profile flag before, or if you talked about what the profile is, but in the AWS credentials file, as part of this process, it actually sets up the credentials for the profile that you need to use to actually run that command, or any command for the project you're setting up.
Right. That's exactly right. So profile -- profile basically tells the AWS CLI which account to use.
And you can grab that name, the name of that profile, from tilde/.aws/credentials.
Yep, that's exactly right. And really, I should make this a lot easier and just add a Gunnerify command. Like,
yeah, I guess that's true, because we'll have the
you can
profile. We'll know what the profile is.
Anyway, and the last one is accounts. So the cool thing about this setup is everything is by account. So, like, let's say you want to just mess around and create a new test project just to see if this works, kind of thing. All you have to do to make sure you don't get charged any money is close the account. Or in the case of, like, the prop swap, let's say Anthony leaves the company and we want to shut down his his accounts. So basically all you have to do is close the account. But in order to close the account, you have to go through a number of steps. And then also what you should do is remove the IAM group and IAM policy on the main account, because those are two things that get created on the root account side. So just to keep those clean, it's not going to hurt anything if you don't remember to delete those, but you should just clean those up just to make sure you don't have any dangling groups or policies in your main account.
I guess especially with the groups, because there's a hard limit to how many groups you can belong to.
Right, which
of 10.
That's another big gotcha, which I should put in there. Is so, like,
yeah, make sure you don't already have 10 groups assigned to the IAM user you're trying to create the account for.
Right. So, and actually, I was actually talking to AWS about this. I think they're going to actually evaluate it.
Oh, huge.
Like in this case, this prop swap, example that we talked about, the one that we're running through right now, at the end of the day, I'm going to set up 3 environments: Cody, staging, and production. Then I'm going to add dairy as well. But by just me setting up those 3 environments, that creates 3 separate accounts. And again, we use the fine grain access policy. So we're going to have 3 different groups, 1 group for each account. So that's 3 groups that I'm in right there, right off rip. I'm in 3 groups, and that basically means that I'm a quarter of or a third of the way to my limit.
30% of the way to the cap.
Yeah, 30% of the way to the cap. So you can imagine if I'm working on 4 projects, I'm screwed because AWS has a hard cap of 10 groups per user. So keep that in mind. In that case, what you have to do if you're working on more than 3 projects at once, you basically have to remove yourself from a group and then re-add yourself to the group when you're back on that account. And it's kind of annoying as well.
It might also be good to add to the sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I would say you can skirt that. You can skirt that by using the more open access policy. But basically, if you do it the fine grain way, you're going to be able to work on 3 projects max at a time.
What if you add the groups to like a super group? Like the 3 groups,
So
can you like subsume them under a parent group and still control the access
yeah, well,
policies?
so what you could do if you wanted to kind of jigger this manually is you could create like you could create a group called Cody's access group,
Oh, okay, yeah.
and then add Cody obviously to that group, and then add every account that Cody should have access to that group.
So you'd attach the policies directly to that group as opposed
Right.
to okay.
Right.
Yeah, I guess
Right.
that's a workaround. The thing I was gonna say, and I don't know if this is 100% accurately the case, but for people who are wanting to mess around with this, new accounts get created in the Amazon free tier, right? There'd be no charges out of the gate for new accounts that you create.
Correct. There's no charges. It's all in the free tier, and actually, everything that's set up is pay per use. So
Yeah,
you're in the free tier, but even if you never use it, because the free tier expires after like 6 months or a year or something like that.
yeah,
Even if you forgot about it, you wouldn't get charged for anything because you only like DynamoDB is per request.
yeah.
RDS is per request. Now, if you put some stuff in S3, you would get charged pennies for it, but that's about the only thing. And same thing with the CloudFront distribution. The CloudFront distribution is per request.
So just in terms of like having to close the account, you don't actually. It's not like spinning up. We were talking about Elasticsearch earlier today. Like if you spin up an Elasticsearch instance, you're getting charged. Like you don't want to just leave that thing running. But this you can just leave running and not have to worry about it, and then close it eventually once you're done
And that's a
messing
good
around with
point.
it.
It's because Gunnerfy does not create an Elasticsearch service instance. However, the cool thing about Amplify is they have these things called directives. And so if you're creating a model, you say at model, then that lets Amplify know that that's a model. If you want to make that model searchable, you just add a directive at searchable.
Mhm.
And when Amplify sees that searchable tag, it will create an Elasticsearch service if one doesn't exist already. At that point, that you put it in there, and by the way, by default, Amplify creates the Elasticsearch service in the free tier. But if you forget about it after the free tier expired, you'd start getting charged.
Right.
So so that's the complete rock through, and we're now it's setting up the CloudFront distribution right now. So that's what's taking the staging
For the staging environment?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
I didn't even see you kick the staging environment off.
Yeah, I did that when you were gone. So the
Oh,
staging
perfect.
environments should be finishing up pretty soon, and then the last thing we'll do here is we'll add you to the account. We'll add you to the project.
What about like future developments for goats, as we're calling it now?
Oh yes. Oh, so that's a good question. So I created it's an open source project, and I just put the issues in here that we want to kind of work on / fix / add. So yeah, and I think I'm going to add this just so I don't forget. Add ability to add RDS after project.
Those are so far from related.
I know yeah, it's still
Beta. You tried.
it tried. It gave it the old beta try. So yeah, that's it. You know, we may change the name of it, like you said, we may change the name of it. Probably should come up with something better. But you know, the overall goal is to try to create like you said, like a Rails on steroids. Which
Yeah.
you know, the Rails command basically it creates a scaffolding project, and that's basically and database migrations. Not only we're trying to do that with Gunnerfy, but on top of that, we're adding architectural setup, deployments, account management, development workflow. So a lot of people are out there cringing, saying it's like, because a lot of people, for example, who like React because it's not opinionated, where
Mhm.
Rails is extraordinarily opinionated. But this Gunnerfy is good for teams that are working on a lot of different projects. Like if you're just you can benefit from Gunnerfy if you're a startup and you're going to be working on one project for the next 5 years. You can still benefit from getting it off the ground, but where this will really shine is if you're setting up new projects like crazy and you need to have it done in a standard way, kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, we talk about standardization a ton, and uh, like back in the biz dev series, we talked about running your company as if you were going to be able to sell it someday. And like one of the big things to be able to sell your company is having the modularity of resources where you can sort of move people around, or if somebody buys your company, they're usually just going to keep a handful of people, if that, and they're going to
Right.
want to plug all of their existing employees into your process. So having this standardized setup where you can just sort of point to the documentation and everything's done a certain way and all projects are started a certain way, set up the exact same way, it just makes it that much easier to roll roll with a ton of different projects.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so, uh, this is interesting. As I was scrolling through to see if anyone was responding to us on Twitter, um, the talk about Amazon Aurora, the SQL-based database, and so now I guess there's a tutorial. This is interesting about running a massive WordPress network off of a serverless Aurora. So basically, you're not charged unless people are using it, kind of thing, which is crucial for WordPress because like there's so many people with WordPress sites that they have to have it for like small companies, but no one ever
Nobody ever, yeah,
no one
right.
ever goes to them. So you kind of have to have them, but you don't want to be paying for a dedicated database just to be, sitting around doing nothing. So that's interesting.
That is interesting. That'd be huge. Serverless WordPress.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I wanted to kind of, again, talk about what we set up. We set up an Expo based React Native client. We set up a React client. We set up AppSync. We set up Amplify. We set up a CDN. We set up user management with Cognito for authorization and user management. We set up a GraphQL API. We set up a DynamoDB database. We set up file storage on S3. And I feel like there's something else that we set up we set up analytics tracking with Pinpoint. And
I guess Sentry as well would have been set up as part of this
yeah,
process.
so Sentry for error tracking, and then
Code commit is set up.
yeah, your Git repository, your code commit repository is set up. So you have your Git repo, and then there is some other one that I cannot think of, which drawing a blank on right now. Did I say GraphQL API? I
You
said
said GraphQL API, yeah.
GraphQL API. There's something else that we set up that. Optionally the Route 53 hosted zone.
Right.
For DNS management, and we set up. Not only do we set up the Amplify CLI, but we set up Amplify hosting, which is basically Git deployment and tracking and things like that. So we're
So like a handful of things.
Yeah, we're setting up like 10 to 15 different things very easily here with this. I mean, very easily now. It was hell to get this all working.
Worth it.
But now that we do, it's I'm sure they'll change everything tomorrow. And
That's the way it goes, really.
oh, side note, as we wait for this to finish, so I was simultaneously like getting really pissed off about the fact that React has introduced hooks.
Mhm.
But then I read through it and it's like, that's pretty, it's pretty useful.
It's pretty cool stuff, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's borderline, right? Like it's certainly useful, and it makes some stuff easier. But I'm like, because literally now everyone is so hyped about hooks that they're using it for everything. So someone who's coming to React is not probably going to jump in with hooks right away because most of the material out there is non-hooks, and then they're going to see all these code libraries that use hooks and not have any idea how they work, kind of thing, which is unfortunate. I don't know.
Can you?
I'm on the fence. I totally see the use for it, and there's some niceties, but it's in no way necessary.
Does it replace Redux?
So it certainly can. They have a hook. So hooks are all. Actually, I have the documents up right now. There's 3 basic hooks, and then 1, 2, 3, 7 advanced hooks. So the basic hooks are use state, use effect, and use context. And one of the 7 advanced hooks is use reducer, which I haven't gotten to, but it looks like it does the same thing as Redux does, because Redux is just again, I'm sure people get mad at me, but to simplify it, it's basically just a reducer framework. So it looks like they've attempted to bake that into React.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to read through this. I guess we'll know how useful they are once the hype dies down.
Yep.
See what sticks around. I don't know if it makes sense to run through like the local environment, like everything that you have available locally for folks to see. Maybe like Expo and React Native Client.
I kind of did that when you were gone.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I kind of went through that to show what everything was there.
Should we talk about Star Trek on All Access, CBS All Access?
That's right. Actually, what
I was trying to get Frank to talk about that because apparently it's a dumpster fire.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I guess the issue is like old school Star Trek was all about hope and exploration and like boldly going where no man has gone before kind of thing. And I think I don't even, what's it called? Discovery? Star Trek Discovery? I think is all about like war and misery and huge space battles. And I think that's why Trekkies hate it.
Well, yeah, you know what? It's so weird because I'm such a big dork for like Star Wars stuff like that. I never got into Star Trek, so I'm kind of outside my element here. But
I can count on one hand the number of Star Trek episodes I've seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, it sounds like they're again kowtowing to this generation that has no patience for like plot development and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and I guess it's weird because the Family Guy, what's his name? Guy Seth MacFarlane has a show called The Orville,
right?
That I think was originally started as like a parody of Star Trek, or not a satire. I guess it just kind of like aped a lot of the Star Trek themes, but with like a cruder humor. And I think it's just morphed into Star Trek at this point. and like people who love Star Trek watch The Orville now. They don't actually watch Star Trek Discovery.
Huh. Okay. All right.
Because I think The Orville is all about that, like the classic Star Trek plotline of we landed on this weird alien planet. They have this weird life philosophy. we have to get them to understand why it's wrong and then leave the planet. I think that's like 90% of Star Trek episodes.
Huh. I mean, I love Seth MacFarlane. Even his even that movie that just bombed, that like A Million Ways to
Ted?
Die in the West.
Oh yeah, I never saw that.
Oh, I think it's.
Is
I
it funny?
mean, I thought it was pretty funny. Like it bombed pretty hard, but
It's got
I
Liam
thought
Neeson, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I'll give it a look. I think they're releasing another Star Trek with Picard, Jean-Luc Picard from
Oh,
The Next
really?
Generation. I think he's getting a standalone show, like a sequel to Next Generation, like Picard's older days. Which I'm not sure who was clamoring for that, but I think they've stopped making movies at this point, maybe because the third one didn't do very well.
Oh, the one with
Idris Elba.
oh, I was gonna say, who's the guy from Heroes? Siler.
Oh yeah. Zachary Quinto.
Yes. Man, we were talking about Game of Thrones and how hard it just tanked it did. But like,
Yeah.
a lesser example of that was Heroes. Like, it was so big for like the first
Oh yeah,
season, maybe the second, and then it just was awful after
that's
that.
such a good call. Yeah, I didn't. The first season was amazing,
Amazing.
and then I think the second season is when Siler became like a good guy. He was like a buddy cop with someone.
Yeah. Yep.
It did go off the rails. It's kind of hard to follow that first season up, though. I guess.
Yep.
I don't even remember if I saw the entire show. The last one I remember took place at some carnival or something.
Well, and they tried to reboot it. They came out a couple years ago with like a reboot.
Did they really?
Yeah, and it rebooted.
How did I miss that? Was it terrible?
Yeah, it was. It was a reboot for the ages. I don't know what that means.
Let's see what the episode rankings are. Oh wait, I did see the last season.
Yes, use reducer is a Redux replacement.
Huh. Yeah, Heroes still had good ratings at the end.
What's that?
Heroes still had decent ratings at the end.
Oh.
As this finishes up. I don't think we'll ever see a universally show like Game of Thrones become a universally reviled show
So quickly.
like Game of Thrones.
So quickly.
That's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. 4.2 is the rating of the last episode on IMDb out of 10. The finale, I looked it up. The finale of the series finale of Keeping Up with the Kardashians had like a 4.3 rating.
That's so rough.
They done goofed. Honestly, though, I'm telling you, if they did a sequel series of Game of Thrones in like 10 years, get the same actors back, and basically position it as like bring Daenerys back, have her maybe have her become the Night Queen or something like that, like have Drogon carry her off into the east to be resurrected or something like that, and basically position the season as like the redemption of the dumpster fire of season 8. It would get so many people watching. People are desperate to have these characters redeemed.
Yeah, totally.
So maybe it's just a really smart play on HBO's part.
Yeah, and it was so funny because someone asked like, HBO executive or something like that. We're like, so the imagine that the spinoff will involve Arya going off like west of Westeros, and they're like, no. It's like then it would. There's just no reasoning to any of season 8.
No, none.
All right, so that finished. So let me show you how to add a teammate. So I'm gonna do this the easy way. So I'm gonna CD into the project. If you're not in the project when you add a team member, you have to specify the project name. So I'm gonna do this the easy way and go into the project, which was, and then I'm going to basically run Gunnerify users add dairy and then staging. So it just looks like that.
Again, staging being sort of like the base stage for this project.
Yep, and it's going to ask what group to add him to,
and it'll list all the groups on your root account.
What's that?
It's going to list all the groups on your root account.
So you can see here's the two groups that we created in the last step. We want to add him to the staging admin. So we're going to just type that in, and then we're going to get an error, which is great. We were so close. Let me do some deving on. Let me do some deving on engineering on site. See what happened here. Do you remember the time when we first met? No, do you remember? Oh, I think it's.
I actually do. That was in Bristol.
Yeah, it was.
For my first interview before I didn't. I had an interview with you guys in the community group in like March, maybe even February, and then you ghosted me like I don't know, someone you're texting with who just doesn't reply to you all of a sudden for like 6 months, and then you came back, you and Ed, and you're just like, "Hey, sorry, I've been out of touch. You want to move to LA?"
Yeah. Well, if you recall, and I don't want to throw anyone underneath the bus, but
we'll say MC.
Yeah. MC was the hiring manager, and the reason why you didn't hear back for so long is because MC bailed, and then we did decide that we were going to move to Los Angeles.
A lot of changes.
Yeah. All right.
Came in at an interesting time.
Yeah. Let me see what the problem is here. Add user.
That was a pretty fun interview, though, as far as interviews go. That's the interview where do you remember like or are you rolling?
I think I've got it.
Potentially.
Yeah, so so if you look, I didn't actually specify the user. You have to actually pass the user flag.
Oh, I think you forgot the U flag, right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't type U. So that was good. It should have bombed. So then we're gonna add, what was it, 15? Yeah, 15. All right, so Darius been adding. So it says here they can run this command. So basically you'd be like, okay, Darius, you're all good to go. And he would run this command right here, and that would add. So basically, if I were Darius,
should I try it real quick? We could do it on my screen.
Yeah. The problem is I'm not gonna be able to dev on site if it bombs, but yeah, we can try it.
Yeah, let's find out what happens. Why not?
Let me go over here.
Can you see mine?
Yep.
Although,
it's got Just bring it. Hit Control C a couple times. There we go. You had there's like a green bar. Oh, now it went away. No, like I wanted you to go down because like when you're at the very top, I can't see your cursor.
Oh,
there.
Like now
now
you can.
See your cursor. Yep. Now I can see your cursor.
Do I need to update the package, npm package?
Yeah.
Let me just grab that command real quick. Come on.
And make sure
while this installs, do you remember you guys, I think a limo or something from the airport? I think it was Hartford Airport.
Oh yeah, that was crazy. They drove everyone in from Hartford with a limo. I can't believe
Yeah,
how much
that
that
was like
cost.
ESPN's policy back in the day. I can't imagine they do that anymore.
Oh no.
But yeah, I remember driving in the limo driver was like pointing out like the elevator factory, and he was telling me about how he drove Dick Vitale, and I was like, that's awesome. But then, like after the interview, when the limo driver picked me up, he was on like painkillers or had like just gone to a bar like the entire time I was at the interview or something, because he was like,
He had just drank Dick Vitale's blood.
yeah, I mean, he was loopy. He was definitely not 100% together there. Like when he was pulling out of the circle, there was a circle in front of like the office building where you guys were in Bristol. He like immediately jumped the curb. Like there's a lot of space to get around the circle, and he was like driving over the center median. But like I had no idea how to play that because I didn't want to come off to you guys as somebody who was like, I don't know, weird or like hyper cautious or something.
That's so
And
funny.
like run back into the office building and be like, my limo driver's hammered. I really don't want to get in a car with him.
So
So I wrote
again,
it out, made it back to the airport. Long story short.
that's the everyone has interesting stories about like interviewing with ESPN. Like I said, with which I talked about on our main show, when I, I'm pretty sure I got hired because of a mistake that ESPN made, and I know it clinched it. So it's kind of two stories. So like I interviewed in January and I was living in South Florida. Or no, I was living in Gainesville. So I flew up there, same thing, got the limo in, but I landed in Hartford and they lost my luggage. So
Nice.
going from Gainesville, where it was like 70, 80 degrees in January, I was wearing like jeans and like a turtleneck. Like it was kind of cold and sneakers. So I get there and the my baggage is missing, right? So they're like, that was at night. So they're like, oh, the baggage will be there at your, what, bring a baggage to your hotel in the morning. I was like, all right. So also, ESPN never told me where to go or what time to be there. They just told me the day of the interview. And it wasn't like I didn't follow up. I tried to track down anyone. They kept being like, don't worry, we'll let you know. We'll let you know.
Yeah, right.
And like,
I mean,
was like,
it's
all
not
right.
like ESPN's a small campus either.
Right. It's huge. And so I mean, they paid for my plane ticket, so I knew they weren't just like blowing me off. Like, all right. So they still hadn't told me, and I still couldn't get a hold of anyone the day before the interview. So I'm basically don't have my luggage, don't have my interview time or location. And so I'm just like, all right, well, I'm gonna wake up tomorrow, and if I don't have a voicemail about when the interview is, I'm just gonna go over there. And I was like, what's the earliest that anyone could? What's the earliest time that my interview could be? And I was like 8 o'clock. And I was like,
Yeah.
all right, well, just to be safe, I'm going to take an hour off that. So I'm going to get there before 7 o'clock. So I show up to the main gate at ESPN in the clothes that I flew in on the day before at 6:45 in the morning. And the guards are like, what are you talking? I mean, there's guards at every entrance. Like, what are you talking about right now? I was like, I don't know. All I know is my hiring manager's name is Jason Warham.
You look like some crazy person just wandering onto ESPN campus.
What's that?
You look like a crazy person just trying to wander onto
Which is a
ESPN
soft
campus.
terrorist target, by the way. So I'm sure they were like, all right, you got to go. So I wait out. They won't even let me into the security booth. So I'm waiting in the cold. You don't need to type in an account, the account thing. You just need to type in Gunnerfy add project prop swap -s or dash -s staging. Yeah,
I think I got it. Perfect.
Oh, you're not on. You're not on. You're gonna have to NVM use 12 and then reinstall the.
Yep. Oops. Every time. Every time. No. It was gosh dang it. Was it this?
Oh, it was bash RC.
Bash RC, yeah.
There we go. Now you have to reinstall.
Or do I?
The package.
Oh yeah, I do.
Anyway, so they maybe wait outside in the cold, and I guess they finally get a hold of Jason. So Jason's like, tell him to go back to the hotel and come back at 10 a.m. And he told him the right building to go to, which Jason was not. Shout out to Jason again. He wasn't responsible for the one who was giving me my time. That was supposed to come from HR, which never got back to me. So I was like, all right. I was like, well, I'm going to go back and grab a nap or whatever, and maybe my luggage will be there. So I go back, grab a nap, get up at like 9. My luggage is not still there. So I'm still in the clothes I was in the day before. So I'm like, all right, at least I know where to go on my time and everything. So anyway, I go back to where I'm supposed to do. It's a full day of interviews. So I interviewed in my stinky clothes all day long.
Yeah.
And ended up getting the job. All right. So obviously. But later on, as I was there for a while and I started to get included in the hiring process, everyone who interviews the candidate, they meet in a room and they talk about whether they should hire him or not. So this is my first time doing this. And we were all talking about what we thought. And it was actually pretty contentious. And someone was like, well, look, we never agree 100% on a candidate. Like, so we don't all have to agree to hire this person. And Jason's like, I'm going to stop you right there. Because the minute that I found out Cody was standing outside the gates of ESPN at 6:45 in the morning in a turtleneck, like, I had decided, we had all pretty much decided we were going to hire him right then.
Yeah, right. That's how you get a job. That shows dedication.
Yeah, exactly. Which that kind of like is the epitome of my career, is just like sheer force of will kind of thing.
Half of life is showing up, or 90% of life is showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
Glory days. "99% of life is showing up." That's the Woody Allen quote.
99%. That's good.
Nope, 80%. It's some large number. Some not trivial number. What's the name of the company that Warren and Ed Davis work for? Star something?
Starwave.
Starwave, that was it. Wasn't that was in Seattle, right?
Yes, that was ESPN.com. I mean, Starwave became ESPN bought Starwave, which then they changed the name to ESPN.com.
Got it. Hold on to your butts.
Well, that sucks. Now the problem is, so look in your here we go again. Right? This is, let's see. You're gonna have to look in your credentials file because it didn't load the credentials.
Actually, just send along the credentials because my credentials is blank. I think maybe it's because I cleared it out. Oh. I'm. It's entirely my fault because I didn't want to share my credentials by accident and removed literally all of them. You can't see my credentials file, right?
No, I can't see it.
Hey now. Did this work? I can't tell.
Did what work?
This. Where did I? Oh yeah, it's working.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have got that shared INI credentials error.
I didn't. It's running from here.
Oh, okay.
I can clear that out. So basically, this is going to create a local copy for me in my local environment.
No. This is just giving you. This is pulling down the project and giving you access to the staging.
That's what I mean. A local copy of the project.
Yeah, exactly.
And the setup. So I don't know if we need to let this run for folks, but just to show them that step, I guess.
Yeah, and then so we'll let this
Or we could
run.
run through the workflow maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we should actually. Yeah, we can do that. Let this run, and then we'll at least show the command again on what you would run next. And I mean, you can run it, but I don't think we need to wait for it because it's going to create another CloudFront distribution, which takes
Right.
20, 30 minutes. This should be good though.
I wonder how many of the Starwave guys went to Amazon. Or was Amazon even in Seattle at that point?
A lot of them did. Aaron LaBerge did. He's the current CTO.
That's right. That's right.
Which I looked it up, and it's weird because ESPN doesn't even have C-level executives anymore.
Really?
Yeah, Aaron's title is like CTO of Disney something or other. So like, they changed big time. By the way, I think I figured something out about this that'll make this a little bit quicker. I think if you add your own environment first, then it will skip the redundant creation of the Amplify stack that we talked about.
It'll basically skip all this stuff.
Yeah.
I guess we could go through the workflow on another episode, maybe.
That's fine. I mean, yeah, break it up, give people a break. We could certainly do it because at the close of an iteration where it would be better.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe we should do that. I mean, this is a good enough walkthrough of basically the entire process to get the app set up on both your machine and like another developer's. We can show like the last command to run
Yep.
and then call it a day. Should add links to the repo to all these. At least
What's
add it
that?
on YouTube. Should add links to the repo. Oh, I did. I already did. Set this pointer to the wrong place.
Wonder what it's waiting on right now. Let me see.
It's not hanging, is it?
I don't think so.
Just taking its time. There you go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say it should be npm installing. And by
It's
the
an
way,
error.
that big error is fine.
Yeah,
That's
the
like,
error that we always get.
yeah, it's like no jip or something.
That's right. That's exactly right. Perfect. And so the last command to run to get it set up on my machine
Which actually says it right there to
would
configure
be
this project with your own environment.
this, and then the email would be prop swap dash dairy is usually like the
yep, and then dash O. Yep,
bit XLLC.
that would be the last one. And then you would be all set up.
Huge. Well, I think that's the perfect place to end it. Hopefully this has been useful for folks, and definitely check out the repo, possibly shortly to be renamed as goats or something similar.
And what I was going to say is, the last thing I was going to say is, if you run this command first,
you go to your screen.
No, I'm talking about your screen.
Mine.
If you run that command that you're showing there right there first, and then run the add command, I think it'll skip creating the additional resources or the redundant resource, the redundant amplify and knit stuff.
So the second step would actually go a lot faster. I mean, or
Yeah.
like the staging step would go a lot faster.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, hopefully this has been useful for folks, and keep an eye out for the next episode where we run through the actual workflow process as it relates to all this stuff. But that's going to do it for now. Thanks, guys.